The fact that we have, I like to call it an inner critic, that is kind of like really mean inside of our head. Yeah. You know, it's harsh. It's like we're looking in the mirror and we're like, don't like what I see. And in the end, I think it's important for us to know that that critic inside of us is actually not just trying to make us suffer. What it's trying to do is it's trying to either protect us or get a need met. And I think that can be an important piece when we're thinking about how we engage in that self-love, is that knowing that there's a part of us inside that really does already love us and want the best for us, even if it's coming out in this kind of misguided way.
Wow. To the Metamorphosis podcast with Noe and
Claire.
Hey. Okay, so our wonderful guest, Clare Karasik, is a queer therapist helping anxious folks develop authentic self-trust and access their ability to feel calm. She firmly believes that we're capable of change and teaches her clients to access the wellspring of confidence that already exists inside them. Claire, welcome!
So happy to have you.
We're so excited. Lots to dive in on
Yes.
today. Okay, so I know in the bio and in talking, so there is this specialization towards anxious folks and helping, self-criticism, self-love. And I mean, this might be a generalization. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But I think, we all maybe experience anxiety, right? I think that's fair to say. So in learning to help coach people who are dealing with anxiety, and we'll dive into the self-love and everything, like, is there any part of you that's brought in maybe your own experience and tackling that, or is it a lot more of what's learned, or how did you learn to start tackling that? Because I think we all can benefit from a bit of that.
For sure. I mean, disclaimer, I live with anxiety in the way that I think a lot of us do, and sometimes I'm like, more and more I think people are experiencing anxiety, or maybe just having language for it. But it's really helped me to, overcome or work through some of the things that are triggers for me, and like worry or doing a podcast, stepping out of my comfort zone.
So shout out to that.
Sorry, I forgot your question.
No, it's because I guess
I forgot it too.
No, I went all over the place, but I was just curious because, again, assuming that everyone deals with some form of anxiety, how much of your part of you being a therapist and helping others who are dealing with anxiety is pulled from maybe your own experience of dealing with your own anxiety, versus maybe what things you've learned and going through school. Like, do you find that you sometimes pull in your own experiences, or is it?
I think anxiety has a lot of like universal elements to it, like the ways in which worry becomes like a habitual response to it, or the way that we try to over control to compensate for anxiety, or lots of these little things that become quite normal across the board. And so I don't know if I need to draw on my own experience, but sometimes it really helps when someone says something to me in a session and I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, I feel that. Like, I know how you feel. I don't always share that, but I think it helps with empathy, just really being in it with people.
100%. That human aspect.
For sure.
Yeah. So our message, we said at the end of every podcast, to be yourself, to do what makes you happy, and to spread love. And that is, of course, drawn from our own experiences. We're both queer. We knew we were gay from an early age. We didn't really tell each other. We share our whole coming out story. We have a Muslim dad, a Catholic mom, and for a long time, we just did not feel the space, the comfort to be ourselves.
Right.
And I know personally, that's a huge part that added to anxiety, that added to a lack of self-love.
For sure.
Not even in, the queer community relates to, you mean?
Specifically, it's like heightened.
Yes. Sorry, I thought you meant you felt extra anxious in the queer community. I'm like, no, that's where I found my safe space.
Sorry, no.
I see what you're saying.
Totally.
So, I guess, and maybe this isn't part of what you specialize in, but I think it might connect to anxiety, because I think there's a lot of people right now, especially in the queer community, but anywhere, that are not being themselves, that feel a pressure to be someone they're not. And through our journey of becoming authentic, or learning to be authentic and be ourselves, I found that almost directly related to anxiety going a little bit down, self-love going a little bit up,
Right.
and the two playing hand in hand. So what are, just because that is our message and that could be a starting point, what are your thoughts on that? Like authenticity and just expressing yourself, being yourself, and how that relates to anxiety, self-love, all of that.
I think what you both were kind of saying is like there are these like gender boxes that we feel a pressure to be in. For example, the ideal perfect woman, I'm quoting for people who are listening.
Yes, 100%.
Yes.
And what that woman is supposed to look and act like. And if you fall outside the box, there is judgment that you receive either directly or indirectly. And even outside of gender, I think there's a lot of expectations in our world. And I think those voices often come and creep right into our minds and speak inside our head as an inner critic that has, a lot to say about what we're doing. And what's more, like if we have experiences with people in our lives that are close to us, not just society at large, but those specific people, those voices of criticism get really implanted inside of us. So I think it's important to think about, like the fact that we have, I like to call it an inner critic that we live with, that is not sort of random, that it comes into being with all of these expectations and pressures, and it really tries to, it's kind of like really mean inside of our head. Yeah. It's harsh. It's like we're looking in the mirror and we're like, don't like what I see. It's really, really rough.
Yeah.
And in the end, I think it's important for us to know that critic inside of us is actually not just trying to make us suffer. What it's trying to do is it's trying to either protect us or get a need met. So it's trying to protect us from hurt, rejection, abandonment, being alone, or it's trying to get a need met like
survival.
Like safety, validation, acceptance, belonging. And it might sound like you look terrible, but what it's really trying to say is, I want you to be accepted, or I want you to feel good and feel happy and to thrive. And I think that can be an important piece when we're thinking about how we engage in that self-love, is that knowing that there's a part of us inside that really does already love us and want the best for us, even if it's coming out in this kind of misguided way.
Wow, that's amazing.
I've never thought about that, because it's I've almost always approached it as tackling that inner voice and
fighting it or silencing it
and making it disappear.
That was the question I was just going to ask you, was like, as you were going before you got to the end piece, I was going to be like, but how do you how do you stop it?
Right.
But that's actually a whole different approach, is actually like looking at it differently versus
seeing it as a form of self-love, because it's technically coming from a good place.
It's coming from yourself.
Yeah, it's coming from a good. It's coming from a good place, right?
Yeah.
Like it really is, and it hurts the way that it comes into our life, and that's where you're sort of, how do I tackle that? Because I think even if we know that it's trying to help us in some way, it still hurts, because those voices are going to pop up in our head, especially if we've had this voice for a long time in different ways. It's not going to just go away because we realize that it's, there to help us, even though that would be very nice.
Oh, wouldn't we love that?
Yeah.
But I think it's even important too that I love, like, some people don't even realize that they have the voice. Like, first step, I think, is even just realizing that there is a voice that exists that is actually telling you these things, that is what is like causing the sort of effects, the negative effects. And then the second part is, okay, now I have a voice, how do I sort of, I don't want to say tackle anymore. Like, how
tame
do I
think you said that.
What's the word? Tame.
Tame or tackle.
Tame's a good word, actually.
Yeah, tame it. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, this might send us on a tangent, and I've kind of opened up a little bit about this, and we'll see if this isn't or not, but I deal with OCD, so this might be a little bit more personal to me. I've never been diagnosed or anything, but definitely being online and reading a lot of like the things that I go through. So especially when we talk about that inner voice, this might be a little bit more on like the intrusive thoughts lane, because like I feel like there's the inner criticism voice, and I'm well aware of that. But then sometimes I feel like there's like the intrusive thoughts voice, and that is like, is that have my best interest in mind?
Yeah, are they connected?
Or that's what I guess I wanted to ask, is before we even dive into maybe how to help tame or tackle or just cope with. Are those the same things, or are those two completely different?
No, he's like, help me out with
my brain. Yeah,
she said,
well, maybe without going into it,
okay,
it might be hard to know. But I think one thing that's really important about both of these things that maybe link them in a different way than you're asking is okay
prepared.
It's just that like we aren't our thoughts, right? Like we have thoughts, and thoughts are ideas, opinions, beliefs, but we aren't them, and they aren't true also. Like they're beliefs. And what makes the thought feel the most real, like in an intrusive thought or even a self-critical thought, is the attention that we bring to that thought and the way that it's repeated in our mind. And it's whether it's an intrusive thought or a self-critical thought, which might be the same. It's really important to remember that what we repeat becomes really ingrained in our brain. And
I always hear that. I say it to myself all the time. A belief is a thought that you keep thinking.
Right.
That's how I kind of
I like
that. It's just a thought that you keep thinking, and it makes it so simple to me that when I have those, I'm like, I'm just thinking this over and over again, and that's why I believe it.
Right.
But it's so hard to switch.
Right.
Like it's so hard to change it. And it's possible.
What prompted this question, and I didn't even anticipate myself asking this, but because I loved what you said of like the self-criticism voice, that's there to protect us, and it's kind of at the root cause there to help us. But a lot of to anyone else who might be dealing with OCD or intrusive thoughts or things like that, a huge thing that helped me was what you just said, like the thought doesn't have to even come from me, and just to just almost like let it pass, just to be aware of it, but then let it pass. So I was just wondering about those two different things of the self-criticism that might be coming out of love versus something that might not even be related to my past experiences in life or anything. It just might not even be mine.
Right.
So
totally. And I think with OCD or anxiety, there's often like a lot of fear, right? And fear also is like our fight or flight response. It's very protective also. It might not actually protect us, but there is that protective element in a similar kind of way.
That's true.
Of I'm going to like detect threats and danger very quickly and all the time, and in order to keep myself safe, right? Avoid bad things from happening. So it might be similar in that sort of, there is this sort of protective part.
Still coming from like self-preservation and okay, so that's interesting. Okay, sorry. Thank you for
that's a good question.
going there. I was like, this might relate back to me.
Just a question around like so the intrusive, maybe we'll not call them intrusive thoughts, but just general thoughts that are anxiety related. Self-criticism, negative thoughts. Where like we say they come from, like they might not necessarily be your own. How would we classify, like, then where do they come from? And one of my theories, like, I'm thinking is a lot of it is, like, childhood and your childhood experiences. And so I guess this is kind of more of a segue question into, like, first of all, I guess, is it important to identify that and kind of say, okay, it's my childhood speaking, or maybe my parents or society? How important is that in, like, identifying where they come from first versus actually being like, okay, let's work on taming it?
I think probably it is helpful to have some level of insight, but not 100% necessary.
Okay.
I think that usually those voices that come from our past experiences speak to, like you said, the voices of other people. If they were actually critical toward us, it creates belief systems within us, right? For example, like, this is a hard thing to talk about, but if our needs were neglected in childhood, right? What does that tell us? It tells us that we aren't worth taking care of, right? And that's a belief system that comes into our world, even if it wasn't explicitly kind of said. And so really self-criticism often connects to unmet needs from our past. And also in our own kind of current life, I think it can come into play a lot when we see media representations of what life is supposed to be and what we're supposed to look like and be. So
social media skyrocketed that heavily, probably, right? Yeah,
totally.
Wow.
Yeah, that's been a huge part for us, or just a huge learning lately, is how much childhood really does shape and affect you.
Yeah, and I was just saying, I guess the reason why I asked that too is I think about, like, for me, I find myself actually analyzing that a lot about myself. Like, I'm very, like, too self-aware. I'm on that level too, where I think too much about every little thing, and then, like, I'll be like, you know, I'll have a thought that comes up and I'm aware of it, and then I feel such a need to be like, where did that come from?
Right.
And I try to trace it back, and I'm like, oh, that was like, I think my mom felt like that, or I just go, and then I'm on a whole other path of deep analysis in another world, which might actually be good because it distracts me from the actual thing. But like, yeah, I guess for me that's why I asked that, because I'm like fixated on like understanding where it comes from. But I love that you said that it's not actually maybe not important to even really focus on that. It's more so focus on
how it affects your daily life and what you could do.
Yeah, like not. I guess the word is changing it.
Right.
Is that like what we would should be trying to do?
Yeah, I think for sure. Like, I think we want to come back and focus on the present. One thing that could be helpful is if we do know where it comes from, if we think about like, okay, like myself as a kid, for example, and let's say I had unmet needs as a kid. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Dogs.
We have
too
so
cute
many
and distracting.
to look over. Yeah.
If we have unmet needs as a kid, it can be helpful to evoke self-compassion, because it's like, okay, think about a kid who I know. Maybe it's my nephew or my niece or my own child or whoever. And I think about how hard it would be for that kid to not have those needs met in that way that we really needed them to be. And sometimes that can evoke self-compassion too, because it's like, oof, yeah, like I really feel that in my gut, in my core, that sense of compassion for a child not having those needs met. So I think it can be helpful for evoking some of that self-compassion.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And even probably just like taking the weight, or it might be the same as like self-compassion, but just taking that weight off your shoulders and not just like, oh, why am I like this? Why am I like this? But, oh, I actually understand, and it wasn't my fault per se. And then that can also help with self-love and self-compassion. Like, no, I need to love myself, and that wasn't my fault. And yeah.
So you were saying, like, how do you...
Let's get into the tips.
Yeah.
Because like, it came up in our previous podcast where like, I think like Noe and I through our journey have done a pretty good job at like working on that constantly, and like, but when I think about like, so where I was previously, like I did not have any self-love or care, compassion. I just didn't even understand what that meant, and so it just translated into low self-esteem. But over the years, I guess through like, so when people ask us like, how did you like give us tips, I find that I'm actually stuck with that a lot of the times. And one of the big things I say is like, talk to yourself in the mirror, and that's one big thing. But like, that has helped me a little bit, but I actually don't have other things to share, and I'm so happy you're here, because like, I'm like, I just think it's been a part of the journey that has happened over time. But if we could bottle that up in some way, and like bypass 7 or 8 years of having to go through things to get there, like, how do we do that?
That would be great.
Let's get to
What's
that.
the quick fix?
Let's get the magic potion.
For sure. Well, I was going to ask you, I'll try to answer that, but
for sure,
are there environments or situations where you feel like the most loving of yourself or connected to yourself?
That's such a good question.
One thing for me that immediately comes to mind is, and I've had a bit of a tough past few months, and it's really forced me to go inwards and focus on self-love and getting myself to feel good about myself and all these things. This might be out of left field, but cold showers. So I started looking into like,
not out of left field.
Okay, maybe not like now.
That's really in.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, well, because anyways, I heard about,
it's
ice
literally
baths
all
and
over
all
your
that.
For You page. What are you talking about?
That's true. No, I just meant like maybe this isn't where the conversation was going to go, but I feel like now every podcast and live I mention my cold showers, but they truly have. I've probably done one every day for the past maybe more than a month.
Okay.
And for me, because I've heard it reduces anxiety, it helps with your mood and all these things, but the biggest thing for me, I was talking about this on our live the other day, is it's almost like that commitment to myself where once a day I know I am doing something that I don't want to do, but I know it's going to be good for me, and I think there's something subconsciously there that's like, oh wow, no, you love yourself because you're doing this for me, not for anyone else. And it's almost like with an emphasis on something I don't want to do. Or like, that's kind of maybe like hard.
I think like, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, your question I interpret it as is like physical environment.
Sure.
But it could be anything.
Interpretation.
Yeah, so my mind went in a different place of like activities, which is fine. Yours is still physical environment. It's the shower. So. But like,
my safe space.
I was thinking around, like, it was just made me really think about that question. Like, first and foremost, what came to mind, which I think is like Noe and I make TikTok when we make TikToks together. Like that feels really good, and like just sharing like thoughts and feelings and beliefs that I never really felt comfortable sharing with people in my life generally, and have always kind of felt a bit ashamed to talk about. That helps now that we can talk about those things and actually receive support and love for that. That's a big one, I would say, but I don't know how that's like applicable. But it helps. And then the other one that came to mind is like on the dance floor.
Yeah, totally.
When it's like the lights off, I'm just listening to music that I love, and I'm just like in my zone. But you know, so I would say
I feel you on the dancing for sure.
Right?
Yeah. The dancing, and I mean,
we gotta go out dancing one night.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
For sure.
But
Yeah. No,
I think for me, one of the, I mean, we were talking about self-esteem. I think that's this like evaluation of ourselves, and I can get really caught up in that. Started playing pickleball, really into it. Super
pickleball
fun.
Is the one that it's like
mini tennis,
not spike ball. I'm thinking spike ball.
Half tennis, half ping pong, a little bit.
She's never played it. I've played it
before.
Okay, yeah, it's really fun.
It sounds fun.
Yeah, I can get really like negative about myself when I'm not doing well, or really kind of positive if I am. And I think for me, the self-love piece that feels like most real is when I screw up, not just in pickleball, but in life and other moments, and I really screw up, and I can still find compassion for myself. In those moments, I think it's like the truest for me of like, okay, I can forgive myself. I can see that I'm human. Like, this is a human experience, and that
there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
And is that all internal, or is it like your teammates being like, almost, you got that? Like, or is it internal?
It definitely helps if other people are reflecting things that I really need to hear anyways. But yeah, I think if it's internal, it's harder to believe for me. But when I can believe it, it feels really good. It feels like, you know, this thing that you would do for somebody else. Like, if you were my teammate, I'd be like, you're good, you got it. And that feels good, right? So if we can do that for ourselves inside, it means a lot. Right?
That's such an interesting piece that, like, to think about too, is like I feel like for myself when I think about it, I so freely give love and kind words and affection and stuff to others around me. And it's just such an interesting question that, like, and I'm sure most human beings are like that, I'd like to think. We experience ones that aren't, but
I wouldn't go so much to say most.
I'm gonna just stay on the hopeful side.
Maybe not on TikTok, but maybe other places.
But then, like, that's such an interesting question. Like, I mean, it's tying it all back. Like, we don't do that with ourselves. And I think it's like, exactly to your point, like, when you're giving, you know, kudos to your teammates and stuff, but then when you make a mistake, like, you should be able to do that to yourself more than anyone.
For sure. Yeah, and I think it's really a practice, like, of the way that our inner dialogue is. Like, I was talking about this idea of, like, neuroplasticity and the way that our brain changes when we think different things. So, like, if we have this, like, self-critical response inside when we screw up in pickleball or in life, and we have this, like, you suck, what's wrong with you, inner dialogue, it's kind of like taking a highway, maybe the 401, if that was better paved, but like a very well-paved highway. That's our most kind of automatic response to things. It's really quick, it's smooth, but having a new thought is like walking through like a grassy field where it's like you're getting poked with grass. So if it's like, okay, that's okay, it's okay for me to mess up, like I'm still doing really well, or whatever that kind of more positive thought is, it's like we're walking through that grassy field where there's no path for this new thought. It takes a lot of effort to think, and when we practice it over and over again, that sort of grassy field gets solidified into a path over time, right? And
part of the grass is probably you probably just don't even believe it right away when you say it too, like that poking.
Totally. Yeah, and it comes back to that idea of like our thoughts are our belief systems. They're not facts. It's like, you know, when we have a self-critical thought, it's like hyperbolized. It's like the worst case scenario. It's so harsh and extreme and black and white. And when I, you know, make a mistake, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a terrible player. I'm a terrible therapist. I'm a terrible person. And that's like an extreme thought, right? And it's important for us to recognize that life is not so black and white, almost ever. And when we have these extreme thoughts, they're not actually reflective of what reality is. Exactly.
I think for me, a big learning with that, I love that you said that, is like realizing and learning that, like, I think between Noe and I, like, Noe's a more like very emotional thinker. She kind of, you know, I'll leave it at that. And I'm a little bit more logical. I like my rigid lines, and I liked math and science because there's one answer. But that was actually very pivotal for me, is learning life is actually not black and white, and there are very, very few things that are hard truths. Something that could seem like a truth for yourself is never actually true. I can guarantee you that. Right. Like it's true for you, and that's completely subjective. And that's also kind of going off topic a little bit, but just to apply it like to what Noe and I face a lot is like criticism and judgment of like you're on the wrong path, you're doing this wrong, you shouldn't be this way, you shouldn't look like this. Says who? Like your belief systems and your thoughts say that, and you think that's so ingrained in reality. But what people need to realize and open their mind to is like that's just one singular reality. And so I love that we're even talking about that. Is like there's just when you have an intrusive thought, bringing it back to this, or a thought that's negative about yourself, you think it's true, but it's not. Right? It's just that you think it is. So I when I realized that, it was very game changing for myself. But it's still so hard when you're in a heightened emotional state. Totally. Because then it's so hard to bring yourself back to thinking like what we're talking about and be like, okay, wait, let me try and think another thought. You're like in that state. How I guess that's a question for you. How do you kind of like cope with like typically those thoughts happen when you're in a like sad, upset, bad state. For sure. How do you state. Any type of like emotion, I feel like makes it harder.
I think often our thoughts, there's a situation that happens, we have a thought based on that situation, and that creates an emotion for us inside. So if it's like, I am just going back to pickleball because it's right there.
I love the pickleball reference.
You screw up in pickleball, you have a thought of like, I'm a terrible player. And how does that make you feel? Like really crappy and ashamed and just negative. And so how do you shift that? Well, I think one thing to note is that our thoughts are really what makes our emotions last longer. So when we get caught in our rumination, we can exist in an emotion for a much longer period of time than if we are just feeling what's happening. So one thing that can be helpful is like, okay, instead of getting caught in the inner dialogue, just like noticing what's happening in your body. I know that's like therapist, 101, like what's happening in your body, but there's a reason for it. And it's kind of just like watching that emotion come and go, because it will go, like it will. And what will help it stay is if you go on the train with the thoughts endlessly. So kind of noticing the thought, coming back to your body, and connecting with what's happening inside.
I love that.
Just on that note, because I've been trying to be really conscious of that, and I sometimes wonder if it's almost like the chicken or the egg situation, because sometimes, of course, a thought can trigger a reaction. So let's say maybe, I don't know, if back when I was working, my boss is like, oh, let's meet tomorrow morning. All of a sudden, then the thought's like, am I getting fired? Is this, that? And then it's causing a reaction. But lately, what I found is I wonder if I'm just in an anxious state, maybe for a variety of different reasons, and then it's provoking anxious thoughts. And then the thoughts make me, because breathing techniques is a whole other thing that I've been gravitating towards, because what I realized is just when I've maybe been having a day of just feeling down or anything, I notice like I'm just like, I feel it right here. It's like this anxiety, and then that's almost making me think like, oh yeah, I have to be anxious about something. And then it's getting my mind racing. And then I just realize I do box breathing now, and I just take some deep breaths, and then I actually feel the emotion go away a bit, and the thoughts might calm a bit. So that's one point. I have another thought too, because in light of that, my mom always jokes around with the two of us, just like Am said. Am's very logical, kind of thinks with her brain. This is what we say. This is generalization. I think with my heart. I'm very emotional. Wear my heart on my sleeve. For that reason, I also a lot of times just try to almost like shut my mind off. So you asked, what are some environments you feel self-love? A lot of times those almost directly correlate to when we're on the dance floor, my mind's off, and I'm just having fun. Right. When I'm going to the gym, listen to my music, mind's off. And so is there maybe some relation, I'm sure we're going to dive into that, but like even just, quieting the mind a bit and just...
Yeah, totally. I love, it sounds like you both have a lot of self-awareness and good practices. It's like, great. Wow.
That means a lot.
I admire that. But yeah, like this idea of being in the present moment, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because with anxiety, it's a lot of like future worry think,
Yes.
or even with like depression, things like that, it's rumination about the past, and we're not in the present moment. And when we can truly be in the present, usually nothing is wrong.
Yeah.
Because I'm grateful to say that usually that in this moment we are okay.
Yeah.
That's so true.
And that's not true for everyone, so I just want to acknowledge
Yes,
that.
absolutely.
But when it comes to our sort of self-made sort of tormenting, often it's the case that in the present moment we are good, right?
Yeah.
And so these moments where we can connect with our body and just experience the present moment in our bodies and without so much thought happening, it can be so freeing. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a big part of one too to add on to that is like the movement aspect, and like he's a very, very admirable, very avid gym goer. I'm not so much, but I do try to get out, and I've got Bougie that helps me do that and like move. But I find like especially my biggest challenges in the winters in Canada. We're in Toronto, and you're stuck in this box for day over day, and it starts. I actually feel like I go like stir crazy a little bit because I don't have any type of outlet or ability other than I guess going out at night on the dance floor. But like, it's not like, it's just different than just getting outside and having movement and seeing greenery. And we don't really see that much in the city. So I feel like for me, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying, but I
think I might know what you're saying because
yeah.
Tell me if it is, because I feel like this is exactly it, because we always talk about this. And again, for me, I'm always like, just go have fun, and whatever fun means. If it's just go be, I'm very, very social. Just go be with friends.
Girl, I know you're itching to say your line.
What? Oh no, I wasn't even gonna say that.
Now I have to hear it.
But no, because I heard RuPaul say it in an interview with Oprah.
That's true,
and Oprah was like, "What's your biggest piece of advice?" And he's like, if you're having fun, you're on the right track. And that like fully stuck with me, because
he always says that like once a week.
I must say it every podcast, so here it is. But because again, when I'm having fun, all of that's shut off. But maybe what your question is what happens when you're like, you don't know what is fun for you, or maybe there's nothing that, like, maybe I feel blessed that, I have my friends and that's enough to just make me happy. But what if there's someone right now that can't even figure out, what will make them happy or make them have fun or turn them on.
Or help their turn on. That's exactly it.
I knew it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
So is there anything that,
yeah, that's exactly it. Like when you're stuck in in your box, or it's winter, you don't have, how, first of all, what are ways, if you don't know, that can help you kind of turn your brain off or connect with your body?
Yeah.
And then if you do know, but you can't access those ways, or there's no way, like, I guess, any tips on that?
Yeah. I think when we think about self-criticism, it can often prevent us from even like going out and trying new things, because I have so many people I work with that like going to the gym is very daunting and scary. Yeah. And there's just so much fear of being like looked at and not knowing how to use the equipment or just fitting in. 100%. And so I think that can be difficult. And then if we feel stuck, it might be sort of similar in that it's hard for us to get that motivation to go out and do things. And what you're saying is so important, that new experiences can be really super rewarding for our whole system, where we can experience newness. It shakes things up inside of us in a way that's really supportive for getting kind of unstuck. If it's the winter, if you're feeling kind of like blah. And there's this idea that even if you don't feel like it, even if we do a little bit of it, it helps create that momentum and motivation inside of us. We think about cleaning. I do this all the time for myself. I'm like, I don't want to clean, but I will commit to cleaning this table, and I will do all of that. And then once you do that, you're like, okay, I could actually clean the counter also.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
baby steps.
Yeah. It creates that internal energy to
almost
do.
like confidence, like you did one thing and now you're like Well, that's what I was initially getting at, but even recently. So normally, again, I'm happy-go-lucky by default and all this, but it's been a bit more challenging lately. And even on this past Sunday, I called her because I was really experiencing the Sunday blues. Our birthdays had just passed, whatever, and I felt lonely and I felt all these things. And I knew my right answer is go take your cold shower, go to the gym, whatever. But sadly, when you're in that dark state, that's the last thing you want to do.
Time to do it.
But like you just said, that commitment, and I knew it, and it was tough, but I said, just go put your shoes on to go to the gym. just start with that.
Right.
And I put my shoes on. I think the first one was just turning the TV off. And right when I turned it off, I'm like, okay, well, now I have to do something.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then go to put my shoes on. And then I remember I went to the gym and I called her right after. And it didn't change everything, but I felt a lot better. And then I took my cold shower and felt a lot better. And then, we carried on with our day. So I think that's just such a huge thing. It's just one step.
That's a really good one.
Even like you said, like you don't want it clean, but you're like, this is my commitment. And I feel like always going to be some type of, whether it's endorphins or gratification or some little tiny mood shift that will help to be like, I did that.
Yeah. It comes back to the doing something different thing, I think. And like, I heard a really cool, small little tip on TikTok. I think it came up on my For You page. In the morning, when you brush your teeth, brush it with the opposite hand, and at the same time, tell yourself you love yourself in the mirror.
That sounds hard to even the first part.
to coordinate, right?
Yeah.
So I actually started doing it. I'll have to get back to you guys with the results. But like, I found like you actually are thinking about what you're saying more because you're thinking about what you're doing, and I think it attributes similar to that as like you're doing something new and you're switching it up. Just 100%. Even something tiny like that for your brain.
This brushing your hands with the teeth of the opposite hand is talking about that idea of neuroplasticity that I was talking about before, where when we do new things or do things differently, when we cross our legs in the opposite way, it helps our system get accustomed to learning and to change. If we're very like rigid about how we do things and the way we do things and not trying new things, it can be a lot harder for us to change our thoughts, for example. Yeah. So I love that. That's really cool.
I just remembered that little tidbit. So try it.
I love that. So in light of all of this, another question is, because I always try to gravitate to have fun and shut my mind off, whatever, on the flip side, I think I know the answer to this question, but is there value in feeling the dark feelings, the negative feelings? If you're going through something, I'm very quick to be like, oh, I'm going to go take my cold shower and turn my mind off and, distract myself. Or maybe it's not even distract myself, but sometimes it might be. But what would you say the values there of like, if you're going through something, how, I know there's not like a quantify time, but like, what's the value of actually feeling, the negative feelings and not always just jumping to the positive ones?
Right. Totally. I think there is that value of even just like naming what it is. So we're not just like jumping up and doing the next thing. Yeah. We're sort of naming what's going on inside for us. And it doesn't need to be getting into the story of what's taking place in our mind, but even just like the feeling of our body of like, okay, I feel anxious. Like I'm feeling anxiety is with me, right? Or I'm feeling a lot of embarrassment or whatever it is. And just noticing that. And I'm always putting my hand on my heart.
That's exactly where it is.
Yeah. My clients, I'm always like, this and that. And they're like, oh my God, okay. But because this is a real act of getting connected with ourselves and feeling compassion for ourselves, right? And what's happening. So, I think there is value in experiencing that. Yeah. And then really, once we've experienced it, once we've sort of named it without just shutting it down, just asking ourselves what we need, right? And often our emotion is going to tell us, I need you, if I'm feeling sad, I need to sit on the couch and curl up in a blanket. And usually what we really need is the opposite of that, what that emotion is telling us. Yeah. Anxiety tells us, you need to fix this urgently now, figure it out, go. And usually what we really need is to slow down. Yeah. So getting to know ourselves and what we really need is difficult, but I think it can help us in not only just attending to the emotion, but not pushing it down too. So I think it's great if you have coping strategies that work for you. I think that's so great. Like, maybe we all have those things.
I think my struggle when I hear that, like, in the maybe follow-up question is like, what if you're a person, for me, like, I think I've probably worked really hard somehow, some way on just not like shoving the hard emotions down. And so what I find that I struggle with now is like even the naming part. I don't even know what it is sometimes. I'm like, I feel something, but what is it? Like I and then I go down a whole analysis piece, but like sometimes it's hard to even figure out what you're feeling. So do you have any tips on that? Like how to even name it if you don't know what it is, or like even if you don't, maybe that's not even, maybe you don't have to name it, but even just the acknowledgement,
or just like or like how to even identify it.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes we can get caught in the intellectualizing of it, and then we're sort of off.
Me all day, every day.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, totally. We're off on like a different path where we're like thinking about this story and that story and what's going on.
Yeah.
And two things I think could be helpful. One is that quintessential therapist thing of just listening to your body, because our bodies can tell us what we're feeling, whether that's constriction or heat or energy. There are feeling bases that go with our emotions that are, unique to some of us, but there are overarching themes. Like anxiety and anger feel like a lot of energy. Sadness feels like a lot lower energy. The shame feels like I want to like hide and like curl up.
Yeah.
So I think that our bodies can tell us, and there's such a thing as a feelings wheel, which just sort of outlines different emotions that exist. And if we aren't sure, sometimes looking at it can be like, okay, which one of those
that's a good idea
for me right now?
Even just visually seeing
like
it.
just
You might not have thought of it.
like Googling it,
Yeah.
and just looking at it on Google even,
Yeah.
or like okay, I'm gonna give that a try. But I think that was a really important one for me too, is acknowledging that there's more that exists in your body, like generally, other than just what's going on up here.
Yeah.
Like I put such an emphasis on like I don't even know if I put an emphasis. I just never knew that like your body has mechanisms that actually contribute to your survival.
Yeah.
Obviously, like there's
Totally.
general, but your I guess feelings and emotions
For sure.
happen in your body too. And even just for me learning that and hearing from you, just to like trust whatever's happening here too and listen to that other than just listening to hear. Again, like I think the biggest thing is like just getting out of your head is so important.
Yeah.
So that helps. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about like our theme, and I want to like I'm like, when we think about self-love and kind of overcoming self-criticism, what has helped you both overcome those kind of negative thoughts, if you have?
Yeah.
Well, so funny because this is literally what I was just going to say to tie it back to your initial question, because I remember you asked, what's a situation or environment where you feel self-love? And this was going to be another point that I wanted to bring up. The people you surround yourself with. Because that, I think, was monumental for me growing up. And I guess it was related to my coming out, but also not. I think it almost coincidentally happened around the same time. But when I was in high school, I felt like I could never really connect to people, and I just kind of felt like I was an athlete, but I never had deep connections, and I'd feel a little awkward. Anyways, I went to school in America, and I don't know what it was, but going there, all of a sudden, everyone just like took to me. And actually, my first year, I hadn't even come out yet, so it actually wasn't directly related to that. But it was just a change of environment, and I don't know what it was, but my environment took to me.
Like, I have a bit of a theory. It just came up to now. Can I say it, or is it not relevant? Do you want to just
go ahead?
Just really quickly, I just realized like predominantly those years that we were kind of experiencing that high school and then your first other year in university where you were in the States but you still felt that way. I mean, there's a correlation. Commonality was a Catholic high school, and your university was a Catholic university.
Yeah.
So even just thinking like, not to say that that's the reason, but like going to the third school you went to.
No. But this is the first school where I felt this.
Niagara.
Oh yeah. So that's what I'm saying. No. So but that was my first time kind of making real friends, and like all the girls on the team, and maybe it was because I played basketball, and so going to the school immediately you have the team, my basketball team, as your family almost. And so there's a lot of people that were going to school and freshman week, and they're like, oh, I gotta make friends, whatever, but I already had friends. I think it maybe just in high school, because there was always groups and I never felt like I fit quite in. It was almost like a fresh start. Nonetheless.
Well, I guess the main point I want to say is like just more diversity.
Right.
There was just or more like variety.
No, just let me finish. But thank you. For some reason, I just felt that I was able to make connections, and there was a lot of people that, just to put it, basically liked me. Like a lot of people just liked me, and they, I made a lot of friends. And that shifted everything for me, because I went from feeling kind of socially anxious and like no one really likes me, or I don't really quite fit in, to all of a sudden all these people that liked me and just made me feel good. And that was the first time almost kind of finding myself of like, wow, like everyone else likes me. So, and I know we should never put our self-worth based on other people, but there was something special about the people that I surrounded myself made me feel good.
Yeah.
About myself too. And so that really helped. And then of course, then I went to Savannah, Georgia, culture change, everything, and half the team was queer.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh my gosh, I can be gay and I can come out. And so that's also when I came out. And then that also really helped. But there was such an importance of the people around me. And I always try to be mindful of that till this day now, of the energy I feel and how someone, not selfishly, but I guess kind of, how someone makes me feel. Because that helps huge.
Well, just a quick thought, because I don't know why I'm just sitting here analyzing your story right now. but I know, because it's just, I'm trying to think so much about it, but like, you didn't choose those environments.
I know.
You didn't choose those people. I know. Like, you just happened to be, like, because I'm just thinking, how could that be applied for, like, other people to learn from? But, like, you just kind of lucked out.
I lucked out 100%. And that's why, like, I can identify it. I don't really think it came from me, and thank you to the universe or however the circumstances played out.
But the point still stands.
But the point it taught me was to be conscious of that, and now I can intentionally be conscious of that person makes me feel really good. Like, I feel really good, and I can be myself, and there's a great connection here. So even when I'm having a down day, I'm like, I want to go hang out with those people, because even without doing all the internal work, which I also could be doing, but that's just going to make me feel good.
Right.
And I've built a world now where I feel very blessed, but a lot of places we go, I feel great. And that helps.
And you don't tolerate as much the places that don't. Like,
exactly.
You don't actively keep yourself in scenarios where
I'm
you don't
hyper
feel
aware
good.
of it. Yes.
Yeah, totally. And being able to integrate people's positive view of you, you know, that's really hard to do if we have a strong critical voice that's like, I don't belong, or I don't have anything to offer, I'm not interesting. That's a big one that I feel like a lot of my clients struggle with, this idea that they're not interesting.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that from when I was younger, feeling like I have to, I don't know what, perform or something. To be able to integrate the positive feedback that you get without discounting it or disqualifying it as like a fluke, or they don't know what they're talking about, but to allow that to be a mirror to what other people really see in you that's already there.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify, not in the sense of like yes people that are just going to tell me I'm great, or like not in that.
Those. Huh? You had one of those.
No, but I want to make that distinction of not make me feel good, as in I only want friends that give me compliments. Like it's more so the internal that I'm able to be myself, you know, that I'm able to just show up and not do the performance or whatever, and we just connect. Yeah. And it's a symbiotic relationship. So again, I want to clarify, not just all the compliments,
100%.
just, you know, the internal bliss that comes out. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it makes a big difference how you feel around people. And, you know, pushing yourself to just get out of your comfort zone a little bit to, like, connect with others, I think is a really big part of overcoming self-criticism and finding self-love, is that our relationships with other people make a big difference. And it can be as small as when you're at the dog park, you know, chatting with someone there. Yeah. These things allow us to just recognize we're human. We're human like everybody else. And again, a big part of self-compassion is just recognizing our common humanity, that we are, like, shame exists in isolation. We feel different. We feel like nobody feels how I feel. Nobody is as boring as I am. Yeah. But really we are just as human as everyone else. And I think those little moments of connection with people can help reflect that truth that already exists, 100%. Right?
100%. So sorry, because I answered your question. You said tying it back to the self-love.
But what was your question again? Because
good question.
It was
such a good one.
It was exactly what I just answered. It's what are some environments that you
or feel, what helped you overcome self-criticism?
Sorry, that's
good. We're teams. Yes.
And so then I want to, like, I would also be curious to hear from you too, like your experiences about, like, have you dealt with that? And I'm assuming we all have. Yeah. But, like, how did you overcome it? But I'm trying to think
as comfortable as we are.
Totally.
Yeah. So again, the question is, how did you overcome your own self-criticism? I feel like I'm still overcoming it, and I would say, like, a big one for me was like what I talked about before, is recognizing there's no truth. So, like, it's just, there's someone says, oh, you're, like, I just maybe had some ingrained belief about myself based on what someone said, or, like, one example I can give is bringing it back to, like, the classroom, and when you're a kid and you get up in front of a class and you have to give a presentation, and that just scared the shit out of me all the time. So I internalized this idea or thought that I'm shy or I'm not good at speaking in front of people.
Right.
And that was a big one for me that I always carried. And that's what I do now all the time is talk in front of people. And recently we got to talk to like some kids in a school. We went to like a high school and we got to do like a whole presentation. Wow. And typically it's us on the camera. But this was a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
Like bunch of years later. And I was so nervous about this. I was telling I got sick the week after because I was so anxious about it. But when we actually got up on stage,
she killed it.
I was a different person. I was like, wait, I thought I was bad at this. Yeah. So
that's amazing.
All I have to say, So it kind of, I think for me, that was a big example of realizing, like, I guess one big one is like when you actually are authentic and you're actually sharing. Like in class, I was talking about like a book I barely read, and I that's like I of course I'm going to be nervous because I don't know what I'm talking about. Versus actually sharing something that's true to my heart, and like feeling the comfort. Thank you to like just generally even like TikTok and like social media platforms that normalize lots of diversity and celebrate you for that. Feeling like I could share something that I'm not like something so true to myself, which is who I am, and not be criticized for it, I think is a big one.
Totally.
And just like being authentic.
Yeah, like being in the space that you feel comfortable and it feels good for you. Yeah.
And I think it's, I think it ties back to what Noe says, it's similar to that, like creating those spaces that allow you to express your full authenticity. And last thing I'll say is like, I feel like I would always be like hiding a little piece of myself, and that would just add to your anxiety, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to that. So getting yourself in environments where you don't have to hide as much as you like, ideally nothing.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And just maybe I'm gonna analyze you now. No? Just one thing to add, I would love to talk to that. You don't have to talk too much to it, but you started therapy this year.
That's true.
And,
that's actually true. That's a big one,
Just a huge shout out to therapy, and I literally was just talking to a friend today, and I think that's going to be my goal for 2024. That is going to be my goal for 2024.
Really?
Yeah.
Good for you, girl.
Of course. But very proud of you for doing that. And I've also just seen the journey of you even uncovering some things, and correct me if I'm wrong, that have really helped you, and probably with that self-compassion of just things that, affected us growing up, and, even just like you said, always having to hide a part of yourself and just understanding where a lot of the things come from. Correct me if I'm wrong, that helped to it too.
100%. Like not only putting yourself in environments to express yourself, but then actually learning about those parts of yourself that you shut off because you didn't think it was okay to like express.
Totally.
And then learning about yourself, I would say, and then like letting it out into the world, which is a very hard thing to do. And so I understand why there's a lot of
but it's a starting place.
So
a huge shout out to therapy. I think that's also probably a great thing to help. But
and you said learning about yourself. I'm hearing like when you thought about yourself as shy or bad at public speaking, it's a very like limiting, defining belief where that's kind of like final. And I love that you had an experience that showed you that that's just not true. Like when we label ourselves in these ways that are so like absolute, it really limits what not only we feel about ourselves, but what we are capable of or what we try.
So true.
So I think it's great to remember that like I try not to label myself as like an anxious person, because that's not fair to me, because I don't always feel that way. Even if it's a lot, there are environments where I don't live with that, or so I love the idea of not limiting yourself by how you label or define yourself.
That's an interesting one too, that I think I started bringing up more commonly with when we chat with me, Noe, and my mom. We typically kind of put Noe and I in categories of like, Noe's the extrovert, Am's the introvert, Noe loves, thinking with her heart and her mind, and then Am's more logical, and I've started to actually become aware of that and be like, but wait, like, I think sometimes I am extroverted in certain capacities, and I'm not just always the introvert. Like, I do have introverted tendencies, but maybe let's just drop the whole introvert-extrovert thing altogether with, like, what you're saying, like, labels. Like, and that could be applied to every capacity of, like, even outside of, like, personality traits, but I think labels in general are just very limiting. Putting you in a box. Limiting,
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's hear about you. How did you kind of overcome, or what was your journey in that area?
For me, my self-criticism comes in the form more of self-doubt, where it's a bit more like anxious, fear-driven of, what if I fail? What if this doesn't go well? Do I have what it takes versus the like, I don't have what it takes. I think somewhere within me, I feel like a inherent confidence, but there's a lot of worry associated with it, which I think for a lot of my clients is the way that it manifests. It's more about, this like, I don't know if I can trust myself. I can't really rely on myself. Can I do this? And it's very anxiety driven. So for me, it's been just like knowing that that's a thing for me. And at times that's sort of how I feel. And then just proving myself wrong a lot of the time. Kind of like your experience, right?
Love that.
And then even if this is where that even if I mess up, even if I'm like, okay, that actually did not go as well as I would have hoped. Remembering it doesn't define me as a whole person. Where when we get stuck in self-doubt and self-criticism, we have these like, again, these absolute like definitions of ourselves of like, I just can't do that, right? Or I don't have what it takes. And it's like, let's actually just talk about this one scenario. Maybe I didn't do as well as I wanted to in this one scenario. Does that define me as a whole person? No, it's not fair to us, right? So I think that for me has been really helpful of, again, just putting myself in those outside of my comfort zone like this, because I really wanted to do that. Thank you. And just giving myself evidence that I can trust myself, or I can rely on myself. I can accomplish things that I want to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that essentially like building your own self-confidence. I love that. Kind of want to add on a little bit to like what I shared about like the overcoming self-criticism is, oh my god, I'm losing my thought now. No, you could do it.
You can find it.
No, it's gonna be take a second. No rush. I think I need a second.
Well, what I'm gonna say is quick though, but I've recently started watching boxing. And there's one boxer I've been watching in particular, and it's so interesting because maybe in the fighting world specifically, but I think it can also be applied to life as this sense of like delusional confidence or delusional optimism. Sometimes we gotta be careful with that.
No, I actually think. Yeah. Anyways.
Delusion can be the solution. Sometimes, not always. Yes. But especially if you're gonna go into a ring and fight someone, like you better believe you're gonna win, or else it's automatically a loss. But just learning to apply that to a lot of things, like imposter syndrome. Again, I'm sure we've all experienced that. But just betting on yourself, even in scenarios where I'm like, I don't know if I can do that, and I don't know if I'm going to be successful or whatever. Just putting all my eggs in this basket, and we're going to do it. And back to the boxing, this one boxer, he was just on a winning streak, only had wins. And each fight, it's like, what if I get that first loss?
Right.
And even if you have that delusional confidence and you're like, I'm going to win, what if you don't? And then he lost. But that loss taught him more than any of the wins did. And so I think it's even when you do fail, still bet on me. Still bet on me, and there's a learning here, and I'm going to benefit from somehow. And still maintaining that delusional, optimism and betting on yourself. So even when there's a loss, how do we spin that into a win? So everything is a win. And so that's been something that I've been really trying to learn, because you're not always going to win. But when you lose, it's still a win. If you make it a win.
Right. Yeah. It's learning.
Yeah.
It's learning, and I think I remembered what I was going to say, but I kind of want to make a point and then tie it into that. But when I was going to say this about when you were sharing your example too, if and when you fail, because you will at some point, and that's something that is also been helpful for me, is to recognize it's going to happen. Yeah. Just be okay with it. You're still breathing. Your heart's still beating. Yeah. Like, it's the world goes on. Not the end of the world. Yeah. Like, people actually don't care as much as you think. Yes. And tying that into what I was going to share that I forgot before, and I remember now, is realizing for myself, taking the emphasis off of what do other people think, and actually realizing that my opinion is actually most important about myself. Yep. And I think, like, maybe just, I don't know, I'm not going to analyze how it came about. I'm, like, dying to be like, how did we get to that belief? But I think, obviously, through our upbringing, society, whatever it may be, I do think we're just taught in society to, like, put such an emphasis on other people's opinions. For sure. And maybe it's a natural thing, too. It is, because we need to be accepted. We need to be accepted and to belong in the crowd. Yeah, exactly. It's, like, coming back to that thing we were talking about at the beginning around that inner critic. When it pops up and it's like, I suck, this is terrible. Coming back to that idea that this part of us, that inner critic, wants what's best for us, maybe, when we notice that voice coming up, we can just sort of say, like, okay, there's that inner critic, like, I notice it,
And what does it really want for me? It wants for me to do well and to succeed. And part of that is being compassionate to ourselves when things go wrong, right? Yeah. It's not an evaluation all the time. It can just be like, okay, like if you had a friend that screwed up in a big way, you wouldn't be like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. You know?
You suck.
You'd be like, you know, we've all been there. Yeah. This is brutal. I'm so sorry this happened. Let me like get you some comfort food and we'll just hang out. Yeah. Right? And that's what we all need internally when we're going through that. So yeah, reframing that care that exists somewhere inside of us and just allowing it to come out in these little actions that we can take. So our inner dialogue and how we talk to ourselves, like how we, you know, take a cold shower, or we cuddle up on the couch and we were like, I'm just going to rest for the rest of the night, or we call a friend, or we do some body movement. These are actions that we can take that show that we care about ourselves, like in our physical body.
That's a big one that I learned this year, is like, actually there is a whole need, an area and section of you actually doing things for yourself. Like, I just never occurred to me, like, you go bring your friend flowers, or you bring, you know, your mom some chocolates, or whatever it is, use nice things for people. How do we skip learning about or realizing that we should do that for ourselves as well? And like just, you know, booking a massage for yourself, and like literally, like I used to go for massages, and I would go and I would just be like, oh, I booked the massage, and I would just move on. But now it's different. It's like, I booked the massage for myself. Right. I'm taking myself. Yeah. Okay. I literally tell my mom, I'm taking myself to a massage today. Nice. And even just that little change of framing your mind to say that you're doing that for yourself almost teaches your brain to be like, I do nice things for me too. Care. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one more question before we wrap things up. We always like to do this. What advice would you give to your younger self?
So I think I would say just keep doing you. Keep experiencing life and keep just flowing with it and seeing what happens. That I've experienced heartbreak when I was younger, like we all have, that in those moments it feels like that's all there is. This is finite. But I would probably tell her there are people that will make such a meaningful impact on your life that you've not met yet, or there are experiences that you'll have that will be so life-changing that you haven't had yet. So keep growing and doing you, and just know that there's more to come.
I love that. Oh my god, this was such a good conversation. Wrapping things up, thank you so much for tuning in to episode number 12 of the Metamorphosis podcast with Am, Noe, and the wonderful, wonderful Claire. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for coming.
Such a beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
Be yourself, do what makes you happy,
spread love,
and morph into the real you! There it is! Be yourself, do what makes you happy. We didn't
Sorry, I remember now.
She was like, I saw her thing. I know. No, because I was like, I normally cut, and then we rehearsed it, and I'm like, maybe I jumped in too quick.
I got it. All right, we did it.
We did it.